Hello and welcome to this next video on mobile repairing. From now on, we will try and work to understanding how we can do jumper settings on the mobile PCBs. The jumper setting, as you already know, is essentially one of the ways in which you can connect two different points on a mobile phone if the internal connections between those 2 points are disrupted on the mobile PCB due to some reason. In this video, we will try and see how we can rectify the ringtone fault or a ringer fault with the help of jumper settings. Now, you may already have seen how a ringer works, and we've already seen one video where we can see how the ringer can be checked with the help of multimeter and how we can replace the ringer on a mobile PCB. So, whenever there is a problem with the ringer, typically the first step is to try and check whether the ringer is working properly or not. Again, many a times, many mobile phones will have one device or one component for both the ringer as well as the headset speaker or the earpiece. But many mobile phones will have two different components, one for the earpiece and one for the ringer. So, whichever mobile you are trying to use, please be sure whether the ringer is independent or it is one component which acts both as ringer as well as earpiece. Once you have identified the ringer, please ensure that you also study the PCB of the respective mobile phone or the circuit diagram of the respective mobile phone. Now, especially when we are working on setting jumpers, you need to know each of those components on the mobile phone PCB, and you will be able to understand these components only if you are able to read the circuit diagram very well and you know exactly where which component is. Now, in this video, we will try and understand how we can use a jumper setting to rectify the ringer fault in this mobile PCB. First of all, let me introduce you to the ringer tip. So, the round circular part that you see on top is the ringer tip. This is where the ringer is placed or is connected to, and this ringer tip is internally connected to the ringer IC on the mobile PCB. So, whenever you think there is a problem with the ringer, first check the ringer the way we have explained it in one of the previous videos. If the ringer is proper, is not a problem, you then move on to check if the connectivity between the ringer tip and the ringer IC is intact or not. Now, in order to do this, you will need to know where the ringer IC is on the mobile PCB, and that is one of the reasons why we insist that you read the circuit diagram clearly. And in order to check the connectivity, we will be using the multimeter once again. One of the common settings where we place the multimeter is usually the beep or continuity testing positions. This is how we check the ringer also. We will use the same method to try and test the connectivity between the ringer IC as well as the ringer tip on a mobile PCB. Now, in this board, we will show you where the ringer IC is placed. Now, please note that this is a dummy PCB. We have been using this for many practical demonstrations, and so some components might be missing on this PCB. However, if you have an active mobile phone, please read the circuit diagram clearly. In this mobile PCB, the ringer IC is placed here. This is the place where the ringer IC is placed, and along with the ringer IC, there are usually some resistors which are also placed next to the IC. So, this is the place where the ringer IC is placed, and along with that there are some two small components which are resistors which are placed there. So, the ringer IC starting from here is internally connected to the ringer tip. So, we will place the probes of the multimeter on these 2 points, one on the resistor on the ringer IC on one end here, and we will place the other end of the probe on the ringer tip. Let us try and see it clearly. So, on one end is on the ringer IC and the other probe is on the ringer tip. So, you can place the probe on each of these places and then check whether you are getting a beep. Now, as you can see, when we touched these 2 points, so you can either place the probe on one of these 2 points on the ringer tip and the other on the ringer IC that we saw earlier. Let me explain it with another PCB for you. In this PCB, you can very clearly see that the ringer IC is placed here. So, this is the ringer IC. So, we place, these are the 2 components which are on top, which measure which are resistors for the resistance purposes, and this is connected with the ringer tip which is placed on top. So, let us now place the tips of the multimeter on these 2 ends and check whether we can hear a beep. Let us touch it and see, you can hear the beep, whereas here on this PCB when we place it, there is no beep. This basically means that the connection between these 2 points is not in place and has been disconnected for some reason. And since there is no continuity, obviously the ringer IC is not able to send the respective signals to the ringer. So, let us go ahead and place a jumper on the board now. Now, in order to do this, first of all, we take the jumper wire and we clean up one end of the jumper wire the way we saw it in one of the earlier videos. You can use the tip of the soldering iron to remove the insulation from the tip of one end of the jumper wire. Once you do that, you place one end of the jumper wire and solder it with the resistance. So, depending on how much length you need, you can try and remove the insulation and then place the jumper wire near the resistance and solder it onto the resistance or the resistor. Now, we have soldered it on the resistor right next to the ringer IC. We placed it here. So, this has been soldered onto the ringer IC component, and then the other end needs to be soldered onto the ringer tip which is on top of the mobile phone. Now, in order to solder it on top, again please cut the respective length of the jumper wire and then remove the insulation from the tip of the wire and solder it on to the ringer tip of the mobile PCB. This is a very simple process. Just hold it and ensure that you are soldering it at the ringer tip of the mobile PCB. So, this is how we have done the jumper setting for ringer fault. So, whenever there is a ringtone fault in a mobile phone, as mentioned earlier, you may want to first check whether the ringer is at fault. If the ringer is intact and is working properly, then you may need to check the connectivity between the ringer IC and the ringer tip. And if the connectivity is not proper, you will need to use the jumper setting to connect the ringer IC with the ringer tip. Now, while you are placing the jumper setting, please ensure that you are careful in connecting the jumper to the right position. Also ensure that you have some free wire on top to ensure that the wire does not fall short, or if it is too tight, the wire could come off very easily when you are closing or sealing the mobile phone. So, leave some extra length to ensure that it is able to sit in properly onto the mobile PCB. One of the important aspects that you must remember when you are doing jumper setting is to ensure that you identify the right components on the mobile PCB before you place jumper settings. An incorrect placement of a jumper wire can result in short circuit of a mobile phone as well. So, please study the circuit diagram clearly before you try to attempt any jumper connection or setting on the mobile PCB. So, we do hope you would have understood how we can do jumper setting whenever there is a ringtone fault or a ringer fault on a mobile phone. Let us continue learning. Thank you very much.